Inspectors are on the move again after COVID, to be sure. I personally just got through with an FDA inspection. I know CLIA inspections are happening now in the US again, and CAP inspections are back up and running. And the CAP does claim that managing staff competencies and training, so staff-related deficiencies, are the number one most cited deficiency for every single agency. So I tend to think that no matter what you're using in your lab, there is probably room for digital staff management somewhere, at least some piece of it. So I am going to talk to you today about digital staff management as well as maintaining competencies in our new world of automation, and also kind of developing novel KPIs for digital IVF labs. I think as the field progresses and our technology is rapidly advancing, new training, new competencies, and new ways of staying current, even with old procedures that are still in use, are going to become more and more relevant. So I hope this is a topic that's interesting for everybody here today. And we are recording this webinar. It will be available online after the conclusion of today. And feel free to ask lots of questions. We'll get to them. This is going to be kind of a very short, quick presentation. Okay. So just to disclose this to you, this is an industry webinar. So I'm the founder of ART Compass, which is a free digital platform that was built by embryologists for embryologists. And the types of solutions we provide help with staff shortages, error reduction, overall IVF success. And if you don't know me yet, you will soon, but you'll know that I love artificial intelligence. And so we're hopeful that that's where the platform is moving, and IVF labs and digital IVF in general. So one question I have for you is, do you think that IVF lab management should be simple? And my question is sort of aimed at Einstein's philosophy that, simple, beautiful explanations are the right explanation to order in the natural world. So we use statistics, obviously. The statistics help to focus our people, they help to measure our success and identify the needed improvements. But I think all of us struggle with what to measure and what makes a successful KPI in our lab. So I was reading a paper recently that says there are 3 different types of KPIs: structural, process, and outcome related. And all of them are with the goal of achieving a healthy live birth. But we know that a healthy live birth is the combination of many efforts across many teams, and it's a multidisciplinary effort. It's subject to confounders. So we have the notion put forth by several of our guidance documents about intermediate versus terminal or end result KPIs. And so the one we rely on here in the States a lot is the Vienna Consensus. I'm going to talk about a few others. But in essence, our KPIs are really challenged by our system complexity. And some of these things are well beyond the lab control. Our rates in the lab can be dependent on the stimulation protocol, the number of eggs retrieved, the age of the patient population, and of course, whether the physician orders, PGT testing, or the number of embryos tested or untested that the physician is transferring. And all of those things are well outside of our control. So the live birth rate needs to be tuned. It needs to be fine-tuned as a KPI for our labs. So the Delphi consensus points out that one of the most important points to reduce the time to a healthy live birth is embryo assessment. And we're going to talk about that a lot. Right now, embryo assessment is mostly performed by embryologists. The field is starting to shift to embryo assessment by machine learning algorithms, whether that's through a time-lapse incubator or regular 2D image analysis. And I found another paper recently about some alternate KPIs that are very lab focused. So a proposed blastocyst rate per M2 oocyte, and the number of M2 oocytes to produce one clinically usable blastocyst from ICSI and IVF procedures. And so again, I think all KPIs need to be tuned to the patient age population because they can act differently. But I like some of these additional KPIs that are being suggested. In the paper about structural KPIs, they point to the number of operators, staff competence, continuous professional development opportunities, because we do have a rapidly advancing technological field. And so they point to the number of critical instruments relative to the number of procedures that are conducted in a given time period. And for example, the number of unscheduled maintenance interventions that can impact patient care in a year. And in my experience, if you're having a lot of unscheduled maintenance interventions that are impacting patient care, then you need to go back and fine tune your prediction of when an instrument will fail. And that can be directly tied to its age, its use, and the operators who are using those instruments, so competencies. So a question I have for everybody here is, have you ever considered data entry as a target for continuous improvement? So data entry itself can be analyzed for as a KPI and as a target for continuous improvement. So we're talking about wrong data formatting, transposition errors, unit inconsistencies, and just general data entry errors that you can analyze. So KPI dashboards are very important to these efforts. They bring these data to light and help us, help it have high visibility in our labs and also help to give it meaningful data analysis. And so some of the other KPIs that I think particularly a training software and competency software can help you bring to light. It reveals the bottlenecks in your embryologist training or your time to training as a KPI, or the number of procedures performed by an embryologist within a single 24-hour period. So I think a lot of times embryologists can get stuck when they're a junior embryologist in a pattern of double witnessing, sperm prep, dish prep, paperwork prep, and it's very hard for them to advance to the next thing. And different trainers might decide that different endpoints need to be achieved in order to be signed off for competency. So I've seen this in action. I know it can be personality dependent between the trainer and the junior staff member, the junior embryologist. And having a defined training procedure that at least specifies a starting place. So these are the number of procedures that you need to observe. These are the number of procedures that you need to split. And these are the number of procedures you need to do by yourself under observation before you can be competent. And this is the percentage that you need to achieve, can be very helpful for moving junior embryologists along in their training plan. And sometimes lab directors don't have the granularity of the insight into how many procedures have been done and what are the stats around those. So the software we're going to talk about today, ART Compass, can help to illuminate some of those KPIs especially for offsite lab directors. So some of the other new KPIs that we can start to talk about when we're talking about this new era of automation and remote clinic monitoring is being able to collect data in real time and analyze it. So a lot of the abstracts that I found are based on the electronic witnessing systems and talking about the timing of procedures. So how long the gametes are out, or gametes or embryos are out of the incubator, and the time that it takes to actually perform these procedural steps. That can also help to kind of inform your workflow in the laboratory and your placement of instruments and workstations. So I think it's really great data to be collecting if you have an electronic witnessing system that can record the timing of activities. It gives you a new way to monitor those KPIs in your lab and help you to make organizational decisions about space and supplies. So many labs right now are still on paper, and many more are undergoing a digital lab transformation. In general, I think digital lab transformations have been rather incomplete. A lot of times they hit mostly the clinical side of our practice, and they don't give us a lot of the tools that we need on the IVF lab side. And then overall, again, I want to stress the importance of reducing data entry errors, and having a single source of data is extremely important for reducing data entry errors. So I know, in a lot of the labs that I've worked in, I've had to enter the same data point up to 8 times across a single IVF cycle. So typically that's going to be the embryo check sheet, the daily check sheet. It can be the cryo record. It can be the biopsy worksheet. It can be into your stats database, and then, your cryo logbook where the embryos are actually being stored, maybe a billing spreadsheet, and then at the end of the year into the SAR or the NAS system. So having a traditional EMR in your lab is a good first step, but I think that traditional EMRs are missing some of those features that we need to really manage a modern day 21st century IVF lab. So a lot of EMRs are installed on site. They're not cloud-based. There's still redundant data entry across the practice, even when there is an EMR in place. They don't work on every single device, so they're not mobile, they're not flexible. They don't include things like competency assessments or flexible form builders where you can build any form in your lab so that we can start getting rid of the paper and the binders and the things that aren't green for the industry. They don't a lot of times include reporting or KPI dashboards. There aren't automated notifications or red flags for missing data entries or data entries that just don't make sense. So, if I retrieve 21 eggs and I put that that I ICSI'd 31 eggs, I want the system to give me red flags that the data doesn't make sense. I want it to be, in other words, smart. I want it to have that kind of AI or machine learning, very simple thoughtfulness about the data that we are putting into these systems. I like automated notifications. The more notifications we have, I think the better. And I like the idea of having a staff dashboard. So a lot of times we have patient dashboards, but what about our staff that we're managing? And I'm also the kind of person who I want the customization to be in my hands. And I think that that is one of the reasons why IVF practices have a hard time transitioning to a digital platform, because a lot of digital platforms are telling you how to run your lab instead of letting you tell the software how you run your lab. And so I want them to be flexible. Now, there are certain pieces of software that actually can do intelligent character recognition and optical character recognition. And I do hope that in the future, we're going to start to see some of these advanced AI technologies being integrated either with our laboratory information systems or with our, within our practice. And I saw recently Fujifilm advertise a scanning piece of software to help digitize, archival data that you have around in your lab. So I thought that was really interesting. But I use my notes app on my phone a lot to automatically scan text-based, paper-based text into my phone and then email it to myself. but it's just a cumbersome system because it's not integrated. So ultimately, I think another question for the field is, could there be a new position within our organizations that is a data entry specialist? Now, a data entry specialist in most organizations is an entry-level employee, but data entry for IVF practices requires advanced knowledge and specialized training, plus the ability to focus for long periods of time and the responsibility to ensure that the data is entered accurately because so much is at stake. So in a way, the data entry specialist could be as somebody who actually has advanced training, and it could be considered to be a new specialty within, embryology and within IVF practices, just exactly the same way that cryostorage has sort of become its own subspecialty within IVF. So there could be specialized training just for data entry for IVF labs. So as far as automated instruments go and the digitization of labs, we need to start looking at what our new KPIs are going to be. So when every single piece of hardware around you is automated and it's doing, a lot of the analysis work that used to be done by people, what will our new KPIs be and what will our new competencies be? So it's starting to become very common for incubators and endocrinology machines to be digitized, and for our sensors and alarm systems to be digitized. And I think smaller instruments now are starting to become integrated into the overall stream of things like ultrasound machines or semen analysis, or coming up, we're going to have the ICSI microscope itself, especially if some of these softwares for sperm selection for ICSI start to be widely implemented in IVF labs. So a standardized competency and training process is really important for your lab. It can help you to address staff shortages. It can help you increase your compliance. It can help you plan succession in your lab, or really help to get that technical supervisor up to the level that you need them to be at very quickly, so that the lab director can really rely on the TS, and also help to reduce error. So software can help the director to assess the skill level and the training bottlenecks in your lab in real time. It can also provide a standardized process that helps to reduce your onboarding and training time. And at the embryologist level, it can help you to track your own progress and increase your own motivation and productivity for pursuing that training. So we're going to talk about embryo assessment as a competency assessment. Embryo quality and assessment are the key procedures in our laboratory, and they've been identified again and again in those studies as critical to reducing the time to a clinical pregnancy. So we always want to transfer the top quality fresh or frozen embryos that are available, and our selection criteria is very important for that, especially with the single embryo transfer practices, and to encourage higher implantation rates and better clinical outcomes. So we made a mobile competency assessment tool. It's a mobile app for your phone, and it's called ART Compass. The competency assessment module was the very first module in ART Compass, which there are now many, many modules inside of it. But one of the first things that we did was to prove that the tool works for competency assessment. And so we used it to survey blastocyst grading agreement across embryologists. We saw what we all know to be true at the lower end and the top end of blastocyst grading. There's typically very good agreement. We can all agree this is a stunning, beautiful blastocyst, and this is a degrading blastocyst or unlikely to make a clinical pregnancy. But there is a huge block of embryos in the middle where grading agreement is very, very low. And so the initial studies we did just showed that. we moved on to taking a survey of embryologists to see what sort of terminology was in use for early blastocysts. So this we presented at PCRS last year. And would you believe that some of your embryologists in your lab would pick terms that don't exist to grade early blastocysts with? Because we did receive multiple answers back that for the faux term that we put into the survey, which was cleaving morula. And so we got some very interesting data here about the wideness of terminology still in use for early blastocyst grading, and the the ability to have people select a type of grade or a grade for an embryo that doesn't exist by presenting it that way. And so I think surveys like that can be very enlightening for lab directors. And you can ask yourself, do you think that your staff could ever pick an answer like that? And then deploy the survey and see what you get. So more recently, we are using the app at the network level to do quality assurance across not just individual practices, but across whole networks. So we'll be presenting our data at ASRM this year for a large study we did with Care Fertility in the UK. So across 11 different locations, they all have very similar protocols and very similar training. And the results were eye-opening. Not only that, but the results we were able to see that they changed over time. And what we actually saw was that our tool helps people to become tighter in their grading within labs. And we'll be showing that at ASRM this year. So hopefully you can all join us at our electronic poster there. So what can our app measure intratech variation on? We can do cell number, symmetry, fragmentation, blastocyst quality, inner cell mass, trophectoderm. We can start to think of putting advanced analysis surveys in there, for example, for uneven cleavage, multinucleation, cytoplasmic granularity, the thickness or the color of zonas, and all of the different things that you might want to be tracking for embryo quality in your labs. We can also measure intratech variation for, and I'm going to go into this a little later in this webinar, but things that can be very hard to measure. So where would you hatch an embryo on day 3? And I'll show you examples of that. But choosing the top embryo among a cohort, and clinical questions that are extremely hard to assess in a traditional proficiency testing, twice a year survey where you're looking at the most, 2 blastocysts, and you're recording your answers on a piece of paper and sending it into the organization. And then the lab director never, it takes weeks for the lab director to get back anything to analyze. So these clinical questions where the embryologist is demonstrating their clinical decision-making, biopsy or not, freeze or not, which sperm to choose, what we're doing is giving the lab director instantaneous feedback into the clinical decision-making of their embryology team. So I'm just going to start to talk to you a little bit about the insides of ART Compass and what you see when you log in. So one of the things that we provide to you is a digital personnel file. So every time that I go to do work at another embryology lab, I set up a profile for myself at that lab, and I upload all my documents, my CV, my resume, my degree, my certificate, my insurance card, my vaccination status, everything that will be helpful to the lab director for their next inspection. And what you're looking at right now is the director view. And in the director view, you can click on the technologist file. It's circled here with red. And then you can review the personnel files of all of your staff, the current actively working ones, and your former staff who have resigned or left the practice. So you simply click on each staff member's profile to get a view of what documents they have not uploaded. So we're providing a red flag here because this profile for this embryologist is not complete. It doesn't have the required documents. And below the embryologist profile, you'll see all of the surveys that they have completed, the ones that they haven't attempted to complete yet, anything that you've assigned them, and then most importantly, any surveys that might require remediation or retaking of those surveys. So we also give you a stats platform. If you are entering your data into a spreadsheet to calculate the stats for your staff, what we do is we give you a very simple form. You will input the data and we automatically calculate those stats for you. Those stats go to each individual embryologist. So as an embryologist, I can open my mobile phone and I can see what my FERT rate is, what my blast rate is. They also go to your physicians. So the physician can open their app and they can have insight into their clinical statistics. So their pregnancy rate, how many retrievals they've done, how many transfers they've done, what results are still pending, how many spontaneous abortions or biochemical pregnancies. All of those things can be recorded and viewed inside the platform. Now, one of the other nice features is the lab director. So I'm showing you here, the lab director has chosen a very experienced embryologist and a very new embryologist. And so when you start typing the names of your staff and then you hit select, you can actually just compare just two people together in the platform. And if you just hit select, you'll bring up everybody in your whole lab to compare stats. So we provide almost 100 lab equations and clinical equations, and then a lot of different ways to filter your data. So you would choose whether you want to look at the lab set of equations or the clinical. You can parse your data by SART age group, by egg donor surrogate, by egg thaw cycles. You can parse your data by MD, by time period, whether it's conventional ICSI or conventional IVF or ICSI, and lots of other ways to view the data. So this is the red tab next to that blue tab that I was just telling you about. The red tab is where you'll find all of our surveys. So our surveys include subjective and objective competency assessments. So we have a whole continuing education module inside of the surveys. We also have the embryology and andrology, which tend to be your subjective competency assessments. We have your color vision assessment, which will be very helpful for you to be keeping all in one place for your CAP inspections. And we also have a section that is mainly just for lab directors. So we call that our digital IVF lab playbook. We've developed that across our scientific advisory board, who has robust and deep knowledge of embryology laboratories and how they run. And what we envision IVF lab directors doing is starting off those competencies or those quality assurance meetings on a monthly or quarterly basis. You will go through and mark each item as being in progress, assign it to your staff, and then as your senior staff read and complete each action item, they can mark them as complete, or your junior staff can read each action item and get a better understanding of why we're doing what we're doing in the IVF lab. So when you use our digital lab playbook, you are documenting your quality assurance, you're documenting your meetings, you're documenting your actions, and you're providing continuing education to your junior staff. And so it's just a really nice way to document quality assurance exercises in your lab. It's fun, it's easy, you learn, document, and do with our system. So I just want to show you now the new ways that we have to assess these kind of old questions. So these are different examples of the types of subjective surveys that you can take in ART Compass. So I'm showing you the one where you would choose the top blastocyst on your mobile phone. So you would simply tap the screen for the top blastocyst that you would choose for transfer. And we're also showing you an example of one of our very traditional surveys that just uses a radio button to, for example, the clinical decision-making survey about freezing or discarding this embryo. This can give very eye-opening results to IVF lab directors. So if you want to perform a survey of your staff like this in your lab, I suggest that you reach out to me, get onboarded on the platform, and we will give you all your results. I'll show you how you can see results in bulk a little bit later, but I can also provide you with a spreadsheet that has every image and every answer for every staff member. Another clinical question that I put, a survey that I put up in the app, would you biopsy this embryo today or would you extend culture? And in these surveys, I try to include a way to calibrate the survey itself. So I will try to put in 5 embryos that are clearly not biopsyable, 5 that would be able to be biopsied by just about anybody, and then 10 questions where the embryos are very borderline and they might even give me trouble to biopsy, for example. So they're really fun to take and to analyze the data. So here's an example of the type of survey that you can take inside the app where we present images on your smartphone and you can actually use our drawing tools to draw on the image. And so if you're training somebody, instead of having embryos out of the incubator and on the microscope while you're talking about this, you can simply use the mobile app. And you can talk about a few of these different scenarios within your lab. Where would you hatch this embryo on day 3? Does your lab like to hatch on the side that has the fragments so that as the embryo grows, maybe those fragments can start to get pushed out of the hole? I did a little survey of my staff and I found that one of my embryologists was hatching really, really close to the cells. And so just kind of trying to keep an eye on how close people are going and whether they're aware of the isobars from the laser and how that can impact the cells. This could give you some eye-opening results for your lab. And this would be a very challenging embryo for anybody to hatch. Where would you hatch an embryo when there are so many fragments, you can't really tell where the cells are, and there are no clear spaces in between the blastomeres that make it obvious where to hatch the embryo? So having these scenarios laid out for you gives you an opportunity to talk about them with your junior staff. So there's a question here about whether the profile documents that you upload carry over when you start at a new clinic. Yes. So inside of our platform, there is a tab that says IVF practice list. And we have made the IVF practice list work so that you put in a resignation date at one practice, and then you can add another practice. And your data goes with you. So the data is de-identified. You'll be able to keep your documents, and you will also be able to keep your de-identified patient statistics. So I know a lot of people are using the platform to personally keep their own statistics, particularly while they're training, and so that they have that evidence of their competency when they move from practice to practice. So some of the other interesting things that we're starting to develop now could be like, which sperm would you pick for ICSI, or where would you nick the tail? And some brand new assessments that we're developing for automated robotic equipment. So if you have a time-lapse incubator in your lab, is anybody surveying how their embryologists perform with annotation against the instrument? And it's an interesting question, because we really should be kind of trying to develop these new competencies as our technology shifts in the IVF lab. So how do we do this competency assessment with brand new pieces of technology that might be, less than a few years old? And so maybe you have developed some of those procedures in your lab, maybe you haven't yet, but let's talk about it. Everything inside the ART Compass platform is totally flexible. If you don't like a button, if you don't like words that are in there, if you want to provide your own set of images for your IVF lab, we can do all of those things for your lab. We can also make those assessments only appear for your laboratory, or if you're very generous and you want the assessments to be available for everyone to use, we can make them available for everybody. Now, the IVF lab directors, one of the things that you should understand when you go through and you answer these surveys is that for the subjective assessments, your answers are becoming the rubric that everybody else is judged by. So you can take a look at how you have answered your own questions. Of course, the objective questions only have one answer, but for the subjective questions, when the techs get back their answers, they actually get back 2 different answers. Within your mobile app, you can scroll through your staff, you can click on each image and see what surveys they've taken. And then if you click on a particular survey, you can compare all the embryologists who have taken that survey. So you can very quickly see where your outliers are within your practice. This is the tech view, and techs can click on these small 3 dots in the right-hand corner to view their certificate of completion and the results for each survey that they have taken. So we have some traditional checklists within our system. You'll find those under the green tab that says Documents and Forms. Open up the Forms folder and you'll see a lot of traditional checklists. And the way that you can use those is you can click on the Show To button and then assign them to various staff members that you would like to be able to enter data into those forms. So you'll find embryology and andrology training documents, annual procedure evaluations there, and many, many other types of lab forms. In our system, you can create all your own forms, or you can take what we have there and use it and modify it and edit it and use it for your own lab purposes. So if you click on your assigned list, you'll see all the forms that have been assigned to you. You can view them, you can edit them, and again, we provide a little red flag here that some of the data is missing from that form. So one of the features that I'm super excited about is our new competency assessment and standardized training process. So we call this competency assessment and training 2.0. It goes way beyond the standard checklist. So you can actually use your phone camera to document what you're doing during your training. And our prompts lead you through a very standardized training workflow. So I'm showing you in particular the endocrinology training workflow, because I know that for me, if I had something like this when I was training on endocrinology, it would have made it so much easier. There are so many details to remember for the Cobas machine and for everything that needs to be done for the, the routine calibration and monthly, weekly, annually maintenance and calibration. There's just so many different small steps. And I found myself, taking these images and videos anyway on my phone and then pasting them into a Word document with all of my notes. And I just had information everywhere. It made training really, really hard. So that was the last feature that I wanted to tell you about. And I'm leaving you just with these thoughts about KPIs. They're kind of indicators for our labs. They're not end states, so they should be constantly shifting, moving. We should reevaluate them and their usefulness and how we're going to measure them. But I tend to think that any measurement is better than no measurement at all. So that's the end of the webinar. Thank you so much for joining me. I know a lot of you already have our Compass downloaded. You can use my link to make a meeting with me anytime. I put my link in the chat window, but I'm going to add it here again. We can do one-on-one meetings to get you set up for this in your facility. And then I'm always willing to talk about how do we modify the system? How do we make it better? How do we make it more useful for us? I can't stress enough, this was built by the community for the community. We are a community-based project. Every image you see in there has been provided by somebody else. The data and the information has been provided by other embryologists. So if you want to, if you want to make a module, if you want to make educational modules, videos, surveys, anything that you can think of, I am more than willing to talk about it with you, and I'd love to have you on board. So thank you so much for joining today. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I know we ran a little, well, we're right at 12:42, so I said this was going to take us 45 minutes. There's a question, a few comments up. Is this the question about whether you can take your documents with you in the platform when you move practices? Yes, you can. So your personal profile stays with you as well as your stats. So thank you, Vet. I hope I talk to you in a few days on a personal one-on-one meeting. So please feel free to reach out to me directly. You can reach me at techteam@ourcompass.io. I know I'm connected with many of you on LinkedIn. Just feel free to reach out to me anytime. Find me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We'll talk. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Hi from Norway. Thank you, Trisha. Thanks, Brian. I hope I talk to you soon and see you. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody.